There is a farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where the tomato plants stand chest high in August, dark green, heavy with fruit, in soil that has not seen a bag of synthetic fertilizer in 4 decades. No blue crystals. No trip to the garden center every April to load 20 pounds of granules into the trunk of a car. The family that tends this land has not bought fertilizer since Jimmy Carter was president, and their yields, measured acre for acre, beat most of their chemically fed neighbors. 17. 300 miles away, in a suburban backyard, a gardener kneels over a tomato plant that is yellowing at the edges. She has just spent $41 on a bag of fertilizer with a logo on it. She will spend that same $41 again next spring, and the spring after that, and every spring for the rest of her gardening life, because that is exactly how the product was designed to work. Here is the question worth sitting with for a moment. If one gardener can grow abundant food for 40 years without buying a single bag of anything, and another gardener buys fertilizer every single season and still watches her plants struggle, what does the first gardener know that the second one was never told? The answer is not a secret ingredient. It is not a fancy soil amendment sold in a boutique bag. It is a system. A closed loop that takes what a farm already produces and turns it back into what the soil already needs. And once you understand how it works, you will never look at a bag of fertilizer the same way again. Before we get into that system, you need to understand one uncomfortable fact about the fertilizer industry, and it is this. A gardener who never needs to buy anything again is the worst possible customer. There is no repeat sale in a compost pile. There is no subscription model for a manure bucket. The entire lawn and garden industry, worth billions of dollars every year in the United States alone, depends on one thing above all else: soil that keeps needing to be fed from a bag. Amish and Mennonite farming communities never built their systems around that dependency because they were never selling anything to each other. They were just trying to keep their families fed. And what they built quietly, generation after generation, turns out to be more effective than almost anything sold under fluorescent lights at a hardware store. This is that system. 6 parts, no purchases. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why a farm that has never bought fertilizer can consistently outperform one that has. 1. The manure cycle nobody advertises. Every Amish farm runs on livestock, and every head of livestock is quietly a fertilizer factory that never sends an invoice. But here is the part that separates a working system from a backyard afterthought. It is not about spreading manure on a field and hoping for the best. It is about timing, aging, and application. 3 things the fertilizer industry has no financial reason to teach you. Fresh manure is dangerous. It is loaded with ammonia, hot enough to scorch tender roots and weed seeds waiting to sprout the moment they hit open soil. An Amish farmer knows this instinctively, the way you know not to touch a stove the moment it is turned on. So the manure gets piled, turned, and aged for 6 months to a year before it ever touches a growing bed. During that time, the temperature inside the pile can climb past 140 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to kill weed seeds and pathogens, while the nitrogen stabilizes into a form roots can actually use without being burned by it. Once it is aged, it gets worked into the soil in a rotation, not dumped all in one place. A field that grew heavy feeders like corn or squash this year gets the richest applications. A field that grew something lighter gets less. It is not random generosity. It is a ledger tracked in a farmer's head instead of a spreadsheet that keeps every acre in balance without a single chemical input. Here is the mistake almost every home gardener makes. the one time they try this. They buy a bag of composted manure from a big box store, dump it straight onto a bed, and plant into it the same week. Commercial composted manure is often only partially aged, and the nitrogen spike can still stress young roots. The Amish approach works because the aging happens on the farmer's own timeline, checked by hand, not by a shrink-wrapped bag with an expiration date printed by a distributor who's never seen your soil. 2. The cover crop that feeds the field while you sleep. Walk past an Amish field in November and you will not see bare dirt. You will see a blanket of green, usually clover or cereal rye, growing through the cold months while every neighboring lawn goes brown and dormant. This is not decoration. This is the second half of the fertilizer replacement system, and it works while the farmer is doing absolutely nothing. Clover belongs to a small group of plants that can do something no synthetic fertilizer bag can replicate on its own terms. Its roots partner with a specific soil bacteria, rhizobium, that pulls nitrogen directly out of the air, a resource that is technically free and unlimited, and converts it into a form the soil can hold on to. Research from agricultural universities studying nitrogen-fixing cover crops has measured contributions of over 100 pounds of usable nitrogen per acre in a single season, delivered by a plant, at zero cost, with zero mining, zero shipping, and zero manufacturing. Cereal rye does something different but equally valuable. Its roots release natural compounds as they decompose that suppress the germination of aggressive weeds like pigweed and crabgrass, sometimes cutting weed pressure by more than half before the growing season has even started. When it is cut down in spring and left to decompose on the surface, it becomes what farmers call green manure, breaking down and feeding the same soil it just spent all winter protecting. The mistake most beginning gardeners make with cover crops is planting them and then tilling them straight into the ground the moment spring arrives, expecting an instant boost. That destroys the very soil structure the cover crop spent months building. The traditional method is patience. Cut it, let it lie on the surface like a mat for a few weeks, and let the microbes underneath do the actual work of turning green growth into available nutrition. 3. Compost that is never wasted, because nothing on the farm is considered waste. Here is something worth pausing on. The average American household throws away food scraps every single week. Wilted lettuce, bruised tomatoes, coffee grounds, eggshells, banana peels, without a second thought, while simultaneously buying fertilizer to replace the exact nutrients those scraps contain. It is one of the strangest contradictions in modern life, and it is one that traditional farming communities never allowed themselves to fall into. On an Amish farm, kitchen scraps, garden waste, and barn bedding all funnel into the same compost system, layered carefully, carbon-rich material like straw and dry leaves, alternating with nitrogen-rich material like vegetable scraps and manure. The pile is turned periodically to keep oxygen moving through it, which speeds decomposition and prevents the rot and smell that comes from an anaerobic, neglected pile. Within a few months, that mixture becomes dark, crumbly, finished compost, indistinguishable in function from anything sold in a bag, except that it cost nothing and used material that would have otherwise gone into a landfill. The mistake most people make when they try composting for the first time is building a pile entirely out of one material, usually just grass clippings or just kitchen scraps, and then wondering why it turns into a slimy, crumbly, smelly mess instead of rich soil. Compost needs both carbon and nitrogen in the right ratio, roughly 2 to 3 parts carbon-rich brown material for every 1 part nitrogen-rich green material. Get that balance right, and decomposition happens efficiently. Get it wrong, and you get a pile that sits there for a year doing almost nothing. 4. The living mulch that replaces both weeding and fertilizing at the same time. If you have ever spent a Saturday morning bent over a garden bed pulling weeds by hand, you already understand why this next piece of the system matters so much. Bare soil is an invitation. Nature does not tolerate empty ground, and if you do not choose what grows there, something else will choose for you, usually something with deep taproots and thousands of seeds waiting to spread. Traditional growers solve this by never leaving soil bare in the first place. Living mulches, low-growing plants like white clover, sown directly between rows of taller crops, form a dense mat that physically crowds out weed seedlings before they ever get a foothold. At the same time, that same clover is quietly fixing nitrogen into the soil around the very plants it is protecting. It is doing two jobs that would otherwise require two separate purchases, a bag of mulch and a bag of fertilizer, using one single planting decision. The deeper layer of this method, often overlooked entirely, is what happens underground once living mulch is established. The root systems create channels through the soil, improving drainage and airflow, while the constant gentle decay of old leaves and stems feeds the same soil biology that keeps the whole system self-sustaining. A garden bed covered in living mulch requires almost no irrigation compared to bare soil, because the ground beneath it retains moisture instead of baking and cracking under direct sun. The mistake most people make here is planting living mulch too early before their main crop has established a strong enough root system to compete for light and water. Timing matters. Let your primary crop get several inches tall and rooted first, then sow the mulch beneath it, not before. 5. The soil that is never allowed to sit empty, exposed, or tilled bare. This next piece is less about what gets added to the soil and more about what never gets taken away from it. Traditional growers avoid deep, aggressive tilling because every time a blade rips through the ground, it does two kinds of damage at once. It exposes thousands of dormant weed seeds to sunlight, triggering germination, and it destroys the underground fungal networks called mycorrhizal fungi that plant roots depend on to access water and nutrients far beyond what the roots alone could reach. Instead, the surface gets protected, always. A layer of straw, aged leaves, or wood chips sits over exposed soil year-round, moderating temperature, holding moisture, and slowly breaking down to feed the biology underneath, exactly the way a forest floor never sits bare beneath its own canopy. Soil scientists studying no-till and low-till systems have documented dramatically higher populations of beneficial soil organisms compared to conventionally tilled ground, because the underground ecosystem is simply never interrupted. Think about what that means in practical terms. Every time you till, you are resetting the soil's progress back to zero. A garden that has not been tilled in 10 years has 10 years of accumulated fungal networks, worm activity, and organic matter working in its favor. A garden that gets tilled every spring never gets to build on what came before. It starts over, every single year, which conveniently means it also needs to be fed from a bag every single year. 6. The rotation that keeps any single nutrient from ever running out. The final piece of the system is the one that ties everything else together, and it is almost embarrassingly simple. Nothing grows in the same spot 2 years and where. Heavy feeders like corn and squash follow nitrogen-fixing legumes like beans or peas. Root vegetables follow leafy greens. Nothing is asked to pull the exact same nutrients from the exact same patch of ground season after season, which is precisely what happens in a garden that never rotates, and precisely why that kind of garden becomes chemically dependent within just a few years. This single habit, tracked on nothing more sophisticated than a hand-drawn map or a farmer's memory, prevents the kind of nutrient exhaustion that synthetic fertilizer exists to temporarily patch over. It does not fertilize the soil directly. It protects the fertility that the other 5 pieces of the system have already built, making sure no single element gets stripped out faster than it can be replenished. Now, here's where I want to pause, because if you have made it this far and you are the kind of person who actually tries what you learn instead of just nodding along, this next part matters more than anything else in this video. Every week, I break down systems like this one. Not quick tips, not gimmicks, actual working methods that traditional growers have used for generations to grow more with less. If you are tired of buying the same bag of fertilizer every spring and wondering why your soil never seems to improve, subscribe now, because the next video is going to show you exactly how to build your first compost system this week using materials already sitting in your kitchen. Here is what nobody tells you when you walk into a garden center and stand in front of a wall of fertilizer bags with bright labels promising fast results. Every single one of those products is treating a symptom: tired soil, stripped of its biology, unable to hold nutrients, unable to support the microscopic life that makes nutrients available to roots in the first place. The bag gives the plant a quick meal. It does nothing to fix the soil underneath, which is exactly why you have to buy another bag next season and the season after that forever, unless you break the cycle. The Amish farm in Lancaster County was never trying to defeat the fertilizer industry. That farm was simply never plugged into it in the first place. It built its fertility the way every productive farm on Earth built fertility for thousands of years before synthetic nitrogen existed. Through manure, through cover crops, through mulch, through rotation, through simply refusing to let the ground sit bare and exhausted. None of it requires a purchase. None of it requires a subscription. None of it requires permission from anyone. That is what this system actually is once you strip away the folklore and the nostalgia. It is independence. It is a garden that keeps improving instead of one that keeps needing to be rescued. It is the difference between renting your soil's fertility one bag at a time and actually owning it, built layer by layer, season by season, until the ground beneath your feet does not need anything from a shelf at all. You now know something that most gardeners standing in that fertilizer aisle this weekend do not. You know why their soil keeps needing to be fed and why 40-year-old Amish garden never does. That knowledge is worth more than anything in a bag, and it costs you nothing to start using it. If this changed the way you think about your own garden, share it with someone who buys fertilizer every single spring without ever asking why. And now, and tell me in the comments, which piece of this system are you building first? The compost pile, the cover crop, or the manure cycle? I read every single comment, and your answers shape exactly what I cover next.